Okay, thank you, Eljo. So my goal for this talk is to give you some idea of how to approach big technology decisions with modest means. We are currently choosing a hybrid integration platform at Kommuninvest, which is going to be the glue between our systems. So I mean, the coupling cannot be reduced, right? This is going to be very expensive to change. Therefore, it's like marriage. And we took sort of an agile, Scrum, intertwined approach, doing experiments. So there are the Agile Experiments in the title. My talk in some numbers first, to give you some context. Kommuninvest employs 100 people, so we are a very small organization. We have 10 people in the IT group. So we do not have so much means to actually do a decent evaluation of technologies. But we will have to live with the consequences for a long time. Long time, well, I mean, if you look at BizTalk, which is one of the popular integration platform products, they have life cycles of 10 years. When you speak to people in the industry, I speak to some integration experts. Usually these products survive for more than 10 years, even beyond their support life cycle. But what we did do is we delivered some real integrations within 6 months of starting the project. So this was a by effect of the way we did the selection. And I'll give you 2 relationship tests. That's why I teach you with how is marriage related to IKEA. About Kommuninvest. Kommuninvest was founded in 1986. The idea is that together, if we issue bonds, we can get better prices on financial markets. So we're a bond issuer for local governments and lend money to local governments in Sweden. And we actually have a better credit rating than the US federal government. We're double, triple A rated by both Moody's and Standard & Poor's. Another thing that for a small organization I'd like to mention is we were recognized by the United Nations for our work with green bonds, which are qualified investments into projects that help protect our environment or improve living environment in some way. Kommuninvest started out small, but of course grew a lot. We now have more than 50% of the market in Sweden. For local government loans, we have 288 members, which is almost everybody that can be a member in Sweden. And we have over 310 billion Swedish kronor in outstanding debt. So this is about $30 billion. To give you an idea of how the complexity has changed since the beginning. So that is also the need, or where the need for integration comes from, right? I mean, this is the application landscape, or an approximation of it. There is actually 135 IT services that we have. And this was integrated in non-optimal ways. There is some shared databases that you do not see. There is some file transfers happening, and this is sort of not really sustainable and does not give us the qualities that we want. The other thing that we want to do is to automate part of our processes. We have a lot of administrative overhead in the organization at the moment. There's a heritage of the growth, so we have some administrative debt, not technical debt. We want to automate it away, and there we have to really automate the integrations as well, couple the systems. So an integration platform is a significant decision for us. And I use the definition by Grady Bush here. So architecture represents significant design decisions that shape a system where significant is measured by the cost of change. So we need an integration platform. How do we go about buying one? And that is where you're here, and the interesting part of the talk. What we did not do are the stereotypes, right? We did not do a very big government tender. Hundreds of pages of requirement specification, get a couple of thousand pages in return, and then sort of try to do something. Needed to rely on the connections, personal connections that were made on the golf course to make the decision for our vendors. That our option lands you in jail eventually. What we wanted to do is to apply some sort of a design thinking approach where we first ideate, narrow it down a little bit, go broad again, and then use prototypes and testing to get down to a final solution. More concretely, we went through three phases. The first one is understanding the context of the decision. You probably have heard other people speaking about that. The second one was to identify finalists that we want to look at. And then finally want to fail with these finalists very quickly, right? We do not want to approach to marriage somebody that we do not want to be with in the long term. So we wanted to fail early on. And this means that your organization has to accept failure, right? And that is, it can be very uncomfortable for some organizations. And there's then, of course, a potential for rework to be done. If you say, okay, this was not it, but we built some stuff, now we have to do it in some other technology. But for us, this worked out really well, and we had good, actually great support from senior leadership in the organization to do this. So let's step into the first phase, understanding the context. So you need some selection criteria and requirements. How can you do this? Well, you talk to your stakeholders in your decision, right? So your parents, in case you're getting married. You do some market research, you go out on Tinder or on Facebook's new dating app, and you sort of scout some vendors. In the context of our decision that the stakeholders were really IT operations, for example, because they'll have to operate and run the system, monitor it. Our developers working on the endpoints, the integration specialists we would be working with. Market research is, available in the forms of Gartner and Forrester reports, for example, and the other consulting houses. This actually gives you some useful input on trying to figure out, okay, what are decisive factors between these systems, what did they look at? And finally, also vendors can actually help you because sales points sometimes are good criteria. Next thing we did there is to do an architecture analysis. So I looked at, again, at our system map. I looked at, okay, what are the applications that are most tightly connected to other applications? And those are then the purple bluish lines now. So these are our core applications, right? And here we really want good support. This translates to other architectural diagrams as well. You will have to understand sort of where does the technology that I want to put into my platform or into my system, where does it fit in and how does it interact with other parts of my system? And where does it have to be compatible? The other thing in this case that was very important for us, and this is where the yellow highlighted lines are in, that is where we go across organizational boundaries. Some of the integrations go to external systems, either cloud services or third parties, right? We, for example, report to the Swedish Statistics Office. So that's sort of things we want to also be able to send in automatically. Once you understand the context, and I've gotten some requirements out, and ideally also quality requirements, you have to find your fiancé, right? Who I'm going to try and test this with, who do I go and date to figure out whether this is going to work or not, and whether I want to eventually propose. I have to sort of figure out my speaker notes here. The thing we did there is to do sort of a really quick and dirty market analysis in an Excel file. We looked at our criteria and all the products that we had found, the products we found in the market research, found talking to people, what sort of competence that we had available. Also talking to some of the vendors, you get some tips or ideas. And then we translated that into a rough scoring, like 1 to 4, you can do any scale that you like. We use that to create a ranking of all the alternatives. One of the challenges here was really to get the right information out. Most of the marketing material that you get on technologies is not very good or useful. It's one of the things we didn't often have access to is technical documentation to judge, okay, how easy will this be to work with. Another challenging thing for us, as we're a small organization, we do not have the money of a large enterprise, so we wanted to buy something that was not too cheap, but also not too expensive. And license fees and license models are something very difficult to figure out, even if you talk to salespeople and pre-sales teams, which we also did in this phase. So one of the things that we learned here is that you need some iteration with these criteria, because first we found out that everything that we selected was integration platforms, okay, and that the marketing material promises the world. So we had to, in some way, separate the twins here. How do we distinguish these platforms? And there we really came back to quality requirements very much. Some of the quality requirements that we had is sort of, okay, is this suitable for an experiment? Can we get started with this technology quickly? Is it scalable for us in the right way? The license model that I mentioned earlier, does it fit our organizational type? And also, some of the other sort of unusual quality requirements that came in were around availability of competence. We're located in the middle of Sweden, not in the major city. So we have to have some people that can actually work with this technology. We found that some of the niche vendors, they did not have any representation in Northern Europe at all, so it would be very difficult to get any backup support. So, and then finally you want to do the stress test, and here's where IKEA comes in, right? So I promised you 2 relationship tips. When I was in university, I had a friend and colleague, and he had a 3-phase relationship test. And the 2 sort of major phases were going to IKEA together. And why is going to IKEA together such a good relationship test? Well, in IKEA you have to go through all of the warehouse before you end up at the exit. And then probably you have picked up more stuff than you intended to pick up. So if you survive that together, then probably you're good. The other relationship test is going on holiday together. And this actually translates to what we have been doing, right? We wanted to try to build real integrations during the test phase. And when you're on holiday together, you're 24/7 together. And we wanted to really be focused on one technology in that fail quickly stage. So we made a preliminary decision, and then we had to do some experiments. I mean, we wanted to not only just build something, we want to actually try to break this thing. And experiments can be both prototyping activities, like we actually build something, but they can also be desk research activities, like looking at, okay, how good is the documentation? How is the support? Does the support answer? So this is, I mean, here's a little bit of test-driven design thinking. How am I going to make this break, or what is the test case before you actually do the experiment? The challenge is to define what is failure, right? When did I pass or fail this test? But once you have that in place, and I'll show you an experiment on the next slide, you can actually put these on your sprint backlog. I mean, these are technical activities, most of them. So you can either develop them with your existing team, or we also brought in an additional resource on the team that just ran experiments for us. That way we were able to make headway very quickly and keep progressing. So an example experiment, one of the things that we really wanted to be able to do is to roll back changes and have version control and everything. So our hypothesis was that we can roll back changes to the integration code, adapters and configuration from version control. So this is an assumption that we wanted to make. The experiment we defined in 4 steps. We want to create something that is functional, not only an example. Store it in version control, of course. Change something and then go back to another version. And then the sort of the interesting part, or the hard part to define, is the success measures. So here what we said is, well, we want to of course be able to do the basic thing. We want to get this old code out of version control, but we also want to browse the history of commits. Looking or getting the old sort of an undo feature is not enough. We want to go back further. We also want to see what sort of changes were made. And that means that we want to be able to actually restore any random previous version that is in version control. So the thing here that we learned sort of doing these experiments is that you have to continuously prioritize your backlog of experiments. Because as you do these experiments, you'll learn more about your technology. So things that you learn will change the importance of, or the chance that another experiment will make you learn new things. Right? So experiments move from need to know to nice to know, and vice versa, as you learn more about the technology. And it's therefore also very important to record your learning. So we kept something similar to a learning card, which I show here. So we state our hypothesis, what did we think should happen, would happen, what did actually happen, how did this experiment go? And what did you learn from this? Because based on that, then you can prioritize the backlog of experiments. So then at some point, you're reaching this point of commitment, right? Are we going to get married or not? And there, when do you decide to do that? Well, I'm going to make Elcho happy here and say, well, that has a lot to do with the remaining risk and cost, right? Once you have confidence in the technology, you don't see any risks anymore that you have to cover with experiments, and it becomes more safe to commit to the technology. Cost is, of course, also a driving factor. I mean, the cost of the rework that you would have to do if you change technology increases over time. That is something to keep in mind when using this approach. Once you do make a decision, you have three options. Either you go for it, you get married, you test some more, continuing the dating phase, or you break up and try something else. The nice thing about working with technology, not people in this case, is that we could be open, and we selected B and C, right? So we were continuing experimenting with the technology we selected, but also started looking at alternatives. The interesting thing here really is that as you have done some experiments, you have learned more about your criteria. It becomes much easier to evaluate the other technologies. There was one technology that we looked at, and that seemed sort of promising because it deployed the same code on-premise as in the cloud. Remember, we were looking for something hybrid, but we were able to rule out this technology within a couple of hours and one vendor meeting. This didn't work. It didn't pass some experiments because we have now learned what are the sensitive points. So the grass is not always greener on the other side. It is something that you learn as well when you start looking again at other technologies. So do we live happily ever after? I don't know. We managed to do this in about 6 months. We're still going, so I mean the time is continuing still. But we seem to be finalizing the decision now. Our IKEA trip turned out to be continuous delivery. Integration tools do not support continuous delivery very well yet. The ability to deploy a microservice update in 10 minutes or 15 minutes did not align with all integration technology solutions. It requires actually some support of the technology itself. But the good news is that we have been on holiday together and we have some integrations in production. So even though we were not intended on getting married yet, we got half the way. So I also want to mention that so in the time investment, we only spent about 300 hours on this, but it is like 2 months of full-time work. That is pretty impressive to have sort of a rationalized decision on a major technology. So with that, I'd like to invite you to provide some feedback on my talk. You can either go in on the link here, or you can try to scan this QR code. I'm not sure how big it would turn out because before when I put this up, but I give you the opportunity to do that.
Thank you very much, Thijmen. Any questions? So I have a question.
Okay.
On your
That is still on.
okay,
Yeah.
I can actually ask my question here. On your IKEA journey, which you said is the ability of integration tools to support continuous delivery, which I think is one of the known issues of integration tools and one of the reasons why organizations that go towards DevOps tend to sort of either change or do away with integration tools altogether.